Hi, this is Kim Hammer, pastor of Saline Baptist Church in the community of Tull outside Benton, with your devotion taken from the book of Joshua, chapter 22, verses 10 through 20. We find that the 2.5 tribes are going back to the east side of Jordan where they wanted to be and where they had left their family and belongings and wanted to reestablish and get on with their life after a long period of war. Joshua sent them over there with 7 spiritual charges. One was, remember the commandments and the laws that you've learned along the way. Number 2, remember to walk in the ways of the Lord. Number 3, love God. Number 4, hold fast to Him. Number 5, love Him with all your heart. Number 6, love Him with all your soul. And number 7, don't spiritually pollute your land. These were the things that Joshua sent the 2.5 tribes back to the other side of Jordan in order to begin to live their life out. Joshua didn't get down in the weeds as far as telling them how to set up a business structure, how to, develop jobs and all those kind of things. Instead, what he did was he gave them the spiritual basis that they needed to build a strong spiritual foundation so that no matter what they did, it would be on the basis of the things that were important in honoring and worshiping and glorifying God. The very first thing they did was they built an altar, but the Bible says that it was an imposing altar. It was built in the area called Gilgal, which in that geographical location you could build an altar and it could be imposing in that it would be seen for miles around because of the way the land laid. I often think about the Devil's Tower out west, how that it imposes itself into the skyline so that you see it for miles around. And that to some people it may not be very beautiful, but in its own way it is. But yet it is imposing into the skyline. But I think the weightier matter of the situation was this, that it was imposing on the land of the 10 tribes that remained on the west side of Jordan, because that's where they built the altar. And when the inhabitants of the 10 tribes learned what they had done, they became furious, so much so that they said, we're going to go to war. They reacted instinctively or impulsively, and they declared that they were going to go to war against the 2.5 tribes. Now, what I find interesting about that, number one, they just came off a long period of war and they hadn't even rested up from that, from driving out their enemies from the land. But the second thing is they were ready to go to war against the brothers that they had been fighting side by side with, but yet they were willing to go to war against them. Before they did, they took a leader from each one of the 10 tribes and the priests, for a total of 11, and they went and they confronted the 2.5 tribes. And in confronting the 2.5 tribes, they attacked them in the very beginning by saying these things. How could you break faith with God and Israel like this? How could you build an altar of rebellion? Has history taught you nothing? Do you not remember what we learned at the Battle of Peor, how that God brought His wrath down upon us because we worshiped false idols, or we didn't destroy those that worshiped false idols? And then they said, after all God has done for you, you're turning away from Him? And if your land is spiritually polluted, then keep it on your side of the river, but don't bring your spiritual pollution over here to our side of the river by building this altar that is imposing not only on our lands geographically, physically, but is imposing upon us spiritually. They even brought judgment on them, and they told them about the consequences of their actions. And what they said was, you bring the anger of God down on you, you're going to bring it down on all of us. And it reminded them about Achan. You remember Achan was the soldier that when they battled and defeated Jericho, they were to take the plunder and bring it back and dedicate it to the Lord. But instead, Achan coveted some things, brought it back, put it under his tent, and when they went to defeat the city of Ai, 36 men were killed because of the sin of Achan, but the punishment was put upon all the nation of Israel. And so we find that when they came back and they systematically eliminated who it was, they found it was Achan, and not only he, but every living thing, including his family, his children, his wife, his dad, everybody, his livestock, was killed because he violated the Lord's principles. Now this was the tone and the attitude of which they came against the 2.5, and they did it in this accusatory manner. As a result of it, we find that things are not always what they seem. Because when we get to the rest of the story tomorrow, you'll find in reality what the whole picture was. Even though they had made this miscalculation when they came up against their brothers that were 2.5 tribes represented, there are some things that are valuable to be learned out of it. Number one, remember what God told you and keep you in the right way. Joshua sent them over there, the 2.5 tribes, with 7 basic spiritual foundational principles, and that's what they were to build their whole entire existence on. The second thing is, before you go to war, investigate to make sure that you have all the facts. They were ready to go to war, but as a result, they sent those 10 leaders plus the priest over to the 2.5 tribes in order to investigate. And then the next thing is that even if you think somebody is wrong, doesn't mean they're not saying something right. So listen, because what you see with your eyes may not always be what's really there. And tomorrow we'll find out how that plays out.